Hello, Chael. Greetings from Greece once more. So Joe and his buddies were talking about Bruce Lee in yesterday's fight companion that they did, and Joe, I think, was saying Bruce Lee would not be very good in a cage with today's knowledge. But my question for you is this: what about if you had, if in some way you can bring Bruce Lee back in his prime, and let's say you give him 2 years to catch up? What would you think would happen if he stepped in a UFC octagon? Thank you very much.
You have to understand, Bruce Lee didn't know how to fight. Bruce Lee was not some kind of a proven tough guy. That's not an insult to Bruce Lee. You just have to understand that time frame, okay? Bruce came over and he was taught some skills, but those skills were based around something called kata, which is where you practice by punching the air. You build your confidence, you work on your push-ups, you get your endurance up. Sparring never took place at that time in martial arts. You could spar if you wanted to go box. You could push and pull if you wanted to get into judo or wrestling or some of the grappling arts. But that's not what he did. So he never really grabbed somebody and worked out. That is a broad stroke that is not completely factually correct. I'm just offering for you to take today's guys every single day, 5 days a week, and a lot of guys 6. They will grab a partner. They will be pushing and pulling and struggling with somebody. Bruce's was more built around philosophies, and Bruce's philosophies were very ahead of his time. Bruce Lee gets a lot of credit, but he deserves a lot of credit. Now, he also deserves a little bit of teasing from a guy like me that's going to go and look at it and go, Bruce, you have one documented competition in your life. And by the way, there was world championships being held back then, not only in Western boxing, not only in kickboxing, but also within point karate. Use Chuck Norris by example. Chuck Norris won, I believe it was 7, if I'm wrong, it was 6, World Karate Point Fighting Championships, but at that same time. And Chuck Norris used to even go and work out with Bruce Lee. And Chuck Norris has recounted this, and he's been as humble as he possibly can to not speak out against somebody who is no longer here, who was also his friend. But he has also revealed that Bruce Lee had some fantastic knowledge, speed, and ability to generate power. That power was done into boards, into heavy bags. He has something, the 1-inch punch, the 6-inch punch, where Bruce could really turn and be very quick and generate some real power. He had some great ideas. As far as applying those into another opponent who's doing equally good ideas back to you, Chuck's been pretty open to that's not what Bruce did. Bruce was more of an idea of a training of a concept guy, which I think would be reminiscent of the fact that he has one documented competition. I watched the competition. A movie has been made of the competition. A book has been written on the competition. I watched, read, and observed it all. I couldn't tell you who he competed against. I couldn't even tell you where it was. So he had some other jobber. He got the jump on the jobber, and then he walked away. He was one of these guys that was very scared to compete. There's no other way to say it. And we deal with these guys today. Believe me, I see these guys in the world of grappling. The guys that can get on covers of magazines and sell DVDs will no longer enter competitions. They are scared to death to compete. It would stun you to the highest of levels how many people are willing to pay money to go and be trained by a guy who's deathly scared to actually put it on the line. That's who Bruce was. And that's the cold, hard reality that nobody wants to fess up to. He talked about that he could beat Muhammad Ali, but he never once actually went in there and boxed somebody. He talked about he could beat Wallace in kickboxing, but he never actually went there and competed with anybody to work his way to Bill Wallace. He talked about he could beat Chuck Norris, but he never actually did these things. That's a very real thing. Look, you could be as great as you want. There are stories that many people will tell. I couldn't confirm if they're true, but I have no reason to not believe them. Experts in basketball will tell you the next LeBron and the next Jordan is not in a college somewhere. They're out in the park. They're on the street. They're playing ball. They haven't been discovered. They haven't been picked up. But that's a very real thing. If you can't get your grades in line to pass the clearinghouse to get into the NCAA, you're not going to be eligible for the draft. You're just not going to get recognized. It's a very real thing. If you can't be organized and conform to a team with a uniform on practice times, listening to your coach, working with your teammates, you're not going to get a shot on the court. It's a very, very real thing. So when you have many of these believers that choose to keep the Bruce Lee idea alive, it's out of kindness. For many of them, it's just based on being naive. most of the stories of Bruce Lee, and by most of the stories, I mean 100%, all come from the same place, which is Los Angeles, California, where Bruce moved, set up shop in his backyard, and had a bunch of dum-dums from the neighborhood come over and he'd beat them up. He would show them things that they had never been exposed to. These people were called actors. They didn't have athletic backgrounds. They simply didn't know what they were doing. Most of them were teenagers, very early 20s, but they had a dream. They moved out to Hollywood to write a script or smile and get discovered, and a lot of them did. So when they went on and became members of the media, they were then in a position to perpetuate the myth of Bruce Lee. All of the myths have one thing in common, which is Los Angeles, California. It doesn't matter if you're talking Jean LaBelle. Blasphemy, Chael. How could you? Yeah, Jean LaBelle's a myth too. It doesn't matter if you're talking Steven Seagal. It doesn't matter if you're talking Van Damme. They all came from the same place, which is Los Angeles, California, which, by the way, is not a hotbed for anything. Not a hotbed in boxing and wrestling and mixed martial arts. They had a guy that brought him in the backyard, beat him up, showing them stuff that they had never seen before, and then they went on and made it. And they put him into scripts, and they put him into movies, and they built something up. This is not an attempt, by the way, to insult Bruce, not in the least, but to bring Bruce into the club of a mixed martial artist, or to act as though that he could walk into the 155-pound division, and take on the Khabibs and the Poiriers and the Connors of the world. This is just silly. His philosophies were right. Bruce had a philosophy that you do not, if you're a karate guy, need to only learn karate. It is okay to learn Taekwondo and add some judo in with it and add some boxing. And when it gets time to put it on the line, use whatever works. Steal from anything. The only thing that matters in fighting is that you win. Bruce was right. And that may sound like a simple concept to you guys, but back then it wasn't the case. Personalize the story real fast. I started martial arts where I'd actually go into a gym, whether it was a boxing gym or a kickboxing gym, jiu-jitsu gym, in the 90s, very mid-90s, 94, 95. If I was a wrestler, and I walked into Pedro Sauer's gym, and I had on a BYU wrestling shirt. I was wrestling for BYU under Mark Schultz at the time. I went into the gym to get a workout. He saw the shirt. He said, "Are you a wrestler under Mark Schultz at BYU?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, if you come back to this gym, I need a letter from Mark Schultz that says you are allowed to train with me." But that was a very real thing. Instructors respected that. You were looked down upon. If you were a wrestler trying to learn jiu-jitsu is in 1995. Not that long ago. Bruce was doing this in 68. Bruce was doing this in 71. He was way ahead of his time to say, no, go and train with everybody. Learn as much as you can. Open your mind up. Bruce was spot on, and he did those things, and he had a lot of knowledge, but he was a philosopher. He was not a fighter.